Welcome to Adventist Reflections, your network sharing character-building ideas.
Now, to discuss character-building ideas, here is your host, Dr. Danzy.
Hi family, welcome back to the Adventist Reflections podcast, your podcast. Today we speak on church and education, and we base this on the text found in the book of Luke chapter 4 verses 18 to 23. One day Jesus said to the people around him that whoever follows him, whoever is around listening to what he says, is to be the light of the world. Yes, you who declares to be a Christian is to show something different to the land where you dwell. When Jesus said this, he pointed out to the idea that we are to be lights for those, for the purpose of glorifying our Father in heaven. Yes, we are to be a light to bring glory to God. What an amazing commendation we have in here. What an amazing thought. One that goes against all understanding related to the way we do things on earth today. The question at hand here is, well, if Christ is commending the Christian to be the light of the world, then we must dissect what light is. What do we imply by stating the light? A story relates that a university professor at a well-known institution of higher education learning challenged his students with the question, did God created everything that exists? A student bravely replied, yes, he did. God created everything. The professor asked, yes, sir, he certainly did. The student replied. The professor answered, if God created everything, then God created evil. And since evil exists, and according to the principle that our works define who we are, then we can assume that God is evil. The student became quiet, and he did not answer the professor's hypothetical definition. The professor, quite pleased with himself, boasted to the students that he had proven once more that the Christian faith was but a myth. Another student raised his hand and said, may I ask you a question, Professor? Of course, replied the professor. The student stood up and asked, Professor, does cult exist? What kind of a question is this? Of course it exists. Have you never been called? The other student snickering at the young man's question, the young man replied, in fact, sir, cold does not exist. According to the laws of physics, what we consider to be cold is in reality the absence of heat. Every body or object is susceptible to the study when it has or transmits energy. And heat is what makes a body or matter have or transmit energy. Absolute zero, which is minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 267.78 degrees Celsius, very cold indeed, is the total absence of heat, and all matter becomes inert and incapable of reaction at that temperature. Cold doesn't exist. We have created this word to describe how we feel if we have not heat. The student continued, Professor, does darkness exist? The professor responded, of course it does. The student replied, once again, you're wrong, sir. Darkness does not exist either. Darkness in reality is the absence of light. Light we can study, but not darkness. In fact, we use the Newton's prism to break white light into many colors and study the various wavelengths of each color. You cannot measure darkness. A simple ray of light can break into a world of darkness and illuminate it. How can you know how dark a certain space is? You measure the amount of light present. Isn't this correct? Darkness is the term used by men to describe what happens when there is no light. Finally, the young man asked the professor, Sir, does evil exist? Now, uncertain, the professor responded, of course, as I have already said, we see it every day. It is in the daily examples of man's inhumanity to men. It is in the multitude of crime and violence everywhere in the world. These are the manifestations and are nothing else but evil. To this, the student replied, Sir, evil doesn't exist. Or at least it does not exist unto itself. Evil is simply the absence of God. It is just like a darkness and cold, a word that man has created to describe the absence of God. God did not create evil. Evil is the result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. It's like the cold that comes when there is no heat, or the darkness that comes when there is no light. The professor sat down. The young name's story is attributed to Albert Einstein. What an interesting story. This story indeed represents that evil takes place when God does not dwell as the center of the attention of any given person or situation at hand. It is with this in mind that I think.
Hey family, have you listened to our mental health podcasts? Listen to Dr. Danzy and Dr. Nard's ridiculously serious ideas shared in a fun, frank and transparent conversation. The Gluten Time podcast is your podcast. You can also find a version in Spanish called La Hora del Gluten. Remember, Gluten Time podcast.
It is with this in mind that I think of the passage found in Luke chapter 10 verses 30 to 37. In this story, Jesus Christ relates the narrative of a man who suffered, beaten severely, and left to die on the side of a road. So imagine this. A road being rocky and desolate, notorious for those robbers to maintain their criminal actions. There the man in question was beaten up. Moments later, a priest passes by, and noticing the moribund man, the priest walks away from him, leaving him to his own deadly fate. Likewise, a Levite man passes, someone who would have been given some duties on the temple. Yes, indeed, a religious man passed by. Perhaps such a Levite just completed the claiming of the mercy of God by the sacrifices in the temple. Who knows? And yet, as he passes, the bashed up man, he looks at the man, observes, checks him out, notices his affliction, and then he turns away, not being the light of the world, declining to bring light to this man. You see, Levites assisted the priest, and therefore they had so much to lose. If they were to assist this dying man by helping the victim, he both risked another attack by maybe the criminals who might be around hiding, who knows? And also, he risked wasting his time, or so he perceives. The time-consuming ritual of cleansing himself for touching a potentially dead man was lengthy. So he chose to walk away. And then he came a Samaritan man who passed by, a person who would have a historical enmity with the race of that person who was dying on the side of the road. Seeing the condition of the man, he stops, cleanses his wounds, and brings him to a place where he can be cared for by paying 2 days of work worth, so all the needs of that man may be attended. As Jesus tells this story, this object lesson, he asks the question, which of all of these men is the neighbor of the dying man? Without hesitation, the listeners answer, the neighbor man, the one who showed mercy, was that Samaritan man, the one who showed mercy. Yes, the Samaritan man, the least expected of all who passed by. The least expected to love his neighbor. The one who was an enmity with that mankind, with that race, showed mercy and became the light of the world. That is, he was the light of the world around him, regardless of race, age, gender, or credo. Yes, regardless of the enmity status between the people. This is what Christianity is all about. This is the light that God calls the people to be. In fact, this is the education needed in church. And indeed, this is what church is all about. A place where people come for restoration and where individual and collective strength is given to the restoration of others. Are you willing to be restored and be the light of the world that Christ calls you to be? Yes, my Adventist Reflections family, are you willing to bring the essence of God's character to the people around you? Are you willing to be the grace and mercy to bring that and pass what God has given to you to your environment for His glory? My Adventist Reflections family, this is the essence of what church is all about. The reflections of Christ's character for the glory of God. This is what Christianity is all about. The proclamation of the gospel for the well-being of all humankind. Yes, as Christians, we are to think and care for others who need our love, our tenderness, and care. We should ever remember that we are representatives of Christ and that we are to share the blessings that He gives, not with those who can recompense us again, but with those who will appreciate the gifts that will supply their temporal and their spiritual necessities. Each soul united to Christ becomes a light in God's house. Each is to receive and impart, letting His light shine forth in clear, bright rays. We are held responsible by God if we do not let this light shine to those who are in darkness. God has given each member of His church the work of giving light to the world. And those who faithfully act their part in this work will receive an increasing supply of light to impart. By His Spirit, the Lord will mold and fashion the human agent, quickening his energies and giving him light wherewith to enlighten others. Yes, my friends, being a light, being like the Samaritan who saved a dying soul, is not given to you by your own self-goodness. No. There is no such a thing as self-goodness in humankind. This can only be given to you by God who gives you light, even if you don't believe in Him. The question is, do you desire such light? Do you want to be intentional and aware from where such light comes from? Do you desire to carry on that banner of Christianity that others may see Christ in you, His goodness, the goodness of God in you for His glory? I certainly hope so. I am Dr. Dancy, and today I choose to love God, choosing to be a light in this world, choosing to receive God's goodness to reflect it onto all who I meet for His glory. How about you?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your family and friends. Find us on Facebook and Instagram as Adventist Reflections Network. You can also leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you for your continued support, and remember, you are created amazingly.